So I think what we'll do tonight, this is kind of an informal conversation, because really we want you to be able to ask some questions, because we know you have some, or you've heard questions from other people. People have come up and asked questions. We're going to introduce ourselves and share with you the role we played in this work, and then we're going to play a recap video. And then we're going to talk about a few of the topics and then leave some room for questions so that you can ask the questions that are kind of on your mind right now. So to kick us off, I'm Kim Jenny. I serve as the Director of Connectional Ministries for the Missouri Annual Conference. So I work here in Columbia at the conference office, just down the road a bit. And I was elected a clergy delegate to General Conference and served on the General Administration Legislative Committee. So we can talk more about legislative committees later. But that was kind of my primary role while I was there.
I'm Jill Wandell. I live in St. Charles now, Missouri. I'm a laity. I'm associate conference lay leader for the conference for the next month, 40 days, and then it's someone else's job. But I elected to General Conference. I also serve on the standing committee for Central Conferences, which has some implications for later, and then I served on the Judicial Administration Legislative Committee.
Yeah, hey everybody. My name is Nate Berneking. I am the Director of Finance and Administrative Ministries for the Missouri Annual Conference. I was elected the first clergy reserve delegate. So in that capacity, I didn't have an assigned legislative committee, but I sort of sat in with Kim in general administration, also finance and administration, which is a different legislative committee, and then I filled in for a little bit on one of the church and society subcommittees. Yeah, so I thought about that. So a significant part of General Conference entailed the adoption of a new retirement plan, and I am a board member of WestPath Benefits and Investments, and I actually chair the fiduciary committee for WestPath, which makes decisions about the health of the retirement plans. And I see Pastor Curtis from Community, who is our clergy support team, our Conference Board of Pensions chair here in the Missouri Annual Conference. So I also did a lot of work sort of liaisoning with WestPath staff between delegates and WestPath staff during General Conference.
Great. Well, if we can, let's watch the video, which I think gives a good recap of the activities of the 2 weeks in Charlotte.
I hereby declare that the postponed 2020 General Conference is now adjourned. Amen.
Beginning April 23rd, 2024, delegates from across our worldwide connection came together for the United Methodist Church's General Conference in Charlotte, North Carolina. Let's see what happened.
Loving every bit, the worship, the preaching.
The one thing that we do better than anybody I know is worship together.
Every worship service I've been in has just been spectacular, and that's the wrong word. It's built my faith.
Are you ready to be the people that God needs for us to be? Let's go.
There's just a lot of hope going around, and it makes me very happy to be here, and it makes me happy for where the church, I hope, is headed.
How people are talking together, how people are praying together, singing together. People are more open to relationship, to learning about each other, to learning about issues.
It's a good experience being here too to discuss issues moving our church forward.
This feels like community and the church and fullness and wholeness.
This is an opportunity for a new beginning, and there's so much hope that I've seen during this General Conference.
General Conference is the prime decision-making body and the only organization that can speak on behalf of the United Methodist Church. Effective decision-making is grounded in effective communication.
That helps reinforce the vision of the church and also our identity as United Methodists. What we're trying to do is democratize access to information.
Our role is to be the trumpet for this entire denomination globally and highlight all of the work that's happening around the world. And we remain very committed to that mission.
I've learned that it's a very connectional church.
Our agencies can help live our mission beyond the local church. It's a great opportunity for us to expand a lot of the ministry beyond our borders.
The General Conference offers an opportunity to celebrate the strength of witness we build through our connectional United Methodist system.
We had the commissioning for new missionaries from GBGM, from everywhere to everywhere.
I present our new missionaries commissioned to service on behalf of the United Methodist Church.
We're an organization that's been mandated through the church, through the Book of Discipline, to engage the church, hold the church accountable, while also building up resources and thinking through what it means to be a church that is equitable and just.
I'm representing Christian Unity and the Council of Bishops.
We've been working with Church and Society, with GBHEM, of course with G-Corps, with Discipleship Ministries.
Gracious and loving God, our hearts are full today because this is your day.
The church is growing and it is on the move.
The Holy Spirit is moving and birthing a church that we always knew was there.
We have not only worshiped, we have commissioned missionaries. We have engaged in receiving petitions that have to do with acts of repentance for heinous acts. We've tended to conversations about healing for people who are the victims of sexual violence.
Today, we're observing the Thursdays in Black campaign. So it's a global movement to end all forms of sexual violence and gender-based violence.
When we came into General Conference, there were many who were concerned about the 3 R's: regionalization, revised social principles, and removing restrictive language.
It is moved to adopt calendar item number 22, worldwide regionalization. Calendar item number 22 has been approved.
It's a very good step towards a collaboration as one people, as one family.
We used to be a U.S. church with satellites in different parts of the world. Now we'll become a truly global church where we relate to each other on a more equal level.
We are a beautiful, diverse, international, worldwide church. And the regionalization plan is a reflection of what that looks like.
Today, we have taken a journey whereby every region within our church will be on the same level.
We don't want anybody to be at the center except for our Lord Jesus Christ, and all of us will exist with total equity, sharing the gifts and the resources that we may offer to each other.
The affirmative has it and the motion is adopted.
Delegates without debate passed an end to a 40-year-old ban on self-avowed practicing homosexuals from being clergy.
We passed the removal of this ban on gay clergy with an overwhelming 93% affirmative vote, a signal of a new period of unity in our church.
We have more traditional people, we have more progressive people, we have people with different views, but we're open to everyone. And now we are truly open to everyone. It's an exciting day for the United Methodist Church.
To me, this is just a reflection of the truth about the church that I've always known.
It is a day of celebration, a day that I have a sense of peace and of joy.
Maybe for the first time when we say open hearts, open minds, open doors, we are consistent with our message. Like, we really mean it this time.
This has really been a 12-year effort to revise these social principles, and our goal, as directed by the General Conference, was to make them more concise, more theologically grounded, and reflective of our worldwide denomination as we begin this next chapter of United Methodism.
I have felt a real sense of our commitment to personal holiness and social holiness.
We're serious about helping people come to find Christ, to know Christ, and then to go live out their faith in the world in a way that sees the kingdom of God come on earth as it is in heaven.
It was
an amazing undertaking.
People all over the church and the world have been working on it.
Well, we're really excited to have a completely brand new judicial council who can help walk us through the process of regionalization. We're also very excited that we've been able to enter into an official communion agreement with the Episcopal Church. We're also working on our commitment to Christian unity and reconciliation by developing an official agreement to create an apology on behalf of the United Methodist Church for our involvement in the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy. We also just passed the smallest budget in the history of the General Conference. The U.S. jurisdictions have agreed to no elections for the time being, and a total of 32 U.S. bishops allocated across the jurisdictions. And deacons finally have sacramental authority in ministry contexts.
Calendar item number 554 is adopted. This is an historic moment.
We are registering people for the General Conference.
I am a marshal.
I'm here on an official monitoring for GCOS role.
I'm serving as a translator and interpreter for Portuguese and English.
Clergy delegate from the Mountain Sky Conference.
I'm serving as a page.
Each session of General Conference is streamed live, and every day over 1,000 people participate in General Conference as a delegate, observer, or volunteer.
There is a lot going on in the plenary, but there is a lot also that's going on behind the scenes, like communications-wise and all the logistics. So we thank you very much for everyone who's helping out making this happen.
We have a very different church. We are moving forward as a different church. This is a new day.
There's a bright hope for the future and for the church as well.
We are having a new set of mindset of change for everyone to feel inclusive.
The most important thing about Methodism to me is the being able to be connected with people who are different than us and agreeing on these most important things.
I think the main thing is we continue to reach souls for Jesus Christ. That always has been part of our Methodism, our connection.
It's a delight to watch the United Methodist Church move with confidence and energy and boldness into the future. To me, that's what it means to be UMC.
Yes, we are excited about our future. God is doing a new thing. There is a renewed hope and a renewed focus in the life of our church as we continue to expand our witness for Jesus Christ and live into our mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world.
Because it really does give you a picture of the diversity of the global United Methodist Church. The church around the world looks a little different than it does here in Missouri, right? So some technical pieces around the General Conference. There are 862 authorized delegates to serve. That's 50% lay, 50% clergy. There ended up being about 765 voting delegates that were present there. And that's quorum is whoever shows up to General Conference. The reason between the difference of 862 to 765 was related to a variety of reasons. Everything from illness and death of some of the delegates that just couldn't make it because of their health, to global delegates that could not receive visas for a number of reasons. But if you look at all of the votes, if we take the less than 100 people that weren't there but were authorized to be present there and turned their votes into no votes, it would not have changed any of the measures that were passed at General Conference. So I think that's an important thing to know. But part of the global aspect of the church is, as we have said before in various settings, our bishop likes to say it, the General Conference is more akin to the United Nations as an experience. Right? I don't think the video showed it very well, but most of the time we wear headphones for simultaneous translation because there are up to 10 languages that are being translated at any given time. There are 4 official written languages of the United Methodist Church. That means that every piece of legislation has to be translated into the 4 official written languages of the church. Those 4 languages are English, French, Portuguese, and Kiswahili. Spanish is not one of them until this General Conference when we passed it. So now there's 5 official languages. It wasn't Spanish because in our relationships outside the United States, Spanish is not one of the languages that's typically spoken. We authorized Spanish to be one of our official written languages for United States, United Methodist clergy and lay people in our country who speak Spanish as their first language. So it just kind of gives you an idea of kind of the global nature of the church, but also how complex and difficult it is sometimes to communicate with one another, because translation and interpretation is slow work. If you've ever had a friend whose first language wasn't English, right? It takes a while, but also when we had non-English speakers speaking, we had to be patient and wait for the translation. Missouri played a major role at General Conference. Not only did we have 12 delegates there, in addition to we had 4 reserves on standby in case we needed them for any reason. We also had volunteers serving there. We had a number of translators, including one of the people featured on the video was Liz Bakar. She is a graduate student at St. Louis University, a graduate of Central Methodist University. She's a double PK. Her parents are Mozambican, so she is fluent in English and Portuguese and was one of the translators. Reverend Naftal, who is a clergy member, serving in the North Central District, was also a translator into Portuguese. Reverend Larry Williams he headed up the Portuguese translation team. He was a missionary kid raised in Brazil, so he's fluent in English and in Portuguese. And Reverend Lydia Istomina, who is one of our pastors in the Northwest District of the state, was there translating into Russian. So Missourians were involved there. We also had a lay woman from Centennial Church in Kansas City volunteer to go serve as a marshal. So she checked our badges one business session. She was assigned to our section. So you got to see Missourians, and then in addition, we had other guests. Pastor Lee was there as an observer. We had a number of Missourians, both lay and clergy, who were there to kind of witness it live. So it was exciting to kind of see that aspect of it, which is a unique experience in the life of the church. So I don't know if the two of you want to talk about, before we dive into the legislation, any aspect of General Conference that you enjoyed or you thought was special that you think that they should hear about. Or not.
Go ahead, Joe.
What was your favorite part, maybe?
I mean, really, the diversity is my favorite part. I always find it to be very powerful to be worshiping, singing songs that I know in English that I'm hearing other people sing in other languages, and it feels like heaven to me when you get to worship in a diverse community like that. It's really powerful. Yeah, and it's fun. You get to make friends with people who are from Mozambique, from all over. We had a wonderful dinner together with our Mozambican delegation. So the Missouri delegation and the Mozambican delegation got together one night. We all had dinner. We celebrated together. So that was also really fun.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I think now that I have time to think. For me, the legislative process itself is pretty fascinating because I think a lot of us, when we sit here in Missouri and we look and we read what's happening at General Conference, especially in the past, there's this sense that a bunch of people get in a room, they don't really know what they're doing, they have a really strong opinions and agendas, and they get together and they have a big argument and they don't really get a lot accomplished. The truth of the matter is, and it was doubly true at this general conference, there is some of that, even at this general conference where there was a lot less animosity, and people were largely there on the same page with each other, wanting to move the church forward in some new directions. There were still very, very strong differences of opinion, but what happens is a conversation, sometimes with hot tempers, but a conversation in which proposals that were all presented in an attempt to solve what somebody saw as a problem are taken up and perfected in some way, and then I think, a ton gets just rejected outright, but a lot of it moves forward for a vote, and it's not simply a matter of winners and losers. I mean, Kim's right. The votes were, except in a very few exceptions, was overwhelming support or overwhelming resistance, not a no vote. And so I found that to be really powerful. It was the church gathering together in what Wesley understood to be conferencing, to have a conversation about what were we going to look like as the church going forward.
And that'll come up when we talk about the legislations, about some of the compromises that were made, because there were compromises made that I think were outside of the realm of a lot of people who have attended General Conference, their experience. Because we had a number of people on our delegation that had been, this is their 5th General Conference. We talked to bishops and other people around us who would say, like, I've been to 8 of these, and this is completely different experience. Jill has been a voting delegate at another General Conference. Nate and I have been to these other General Conferences. It felt very different. It felt like even when we disagreed, which we did, it's not like everybody was in lockstep together. It felt holy, the way we treated one another, the way we could see one another. And people, you would often see people, at least in my legislative committee, you spend time kind of giving, speeches for and against. But after we would finish with a measure and get ready to take a break, people would go up to each other and shake hands or embrace and say, I kind of see your point, or I just don't, I just think it's maybe this way's better. And so from a technical perspective, I brought my show and tell. If you're thinking about, hey, how do you, I might like to be a delegate someday, you need to like to read.
Legislation,
not fiction or, World War II, books. You got to be willing to read. This represents 1,099 petitions that were offered up for General Conference to take up. A lot of people say, well, that seems like a lot. That is pretty standard for every General Conference. In fact, I think in 2016 they said it was 1,200 pieces of legislation. And according to our discipline, we have to deal with all 1,099 during the course of the 2 weeks. So how does that happen? How do you get through 1,099 petitions in 2 weeks? Nate, do you want to talk about how the legislative process happens between legislative committee and?
So first of all, any United Methodist, any professing member of a United Methodist Church, any agency, any conference, any local church can put forth legislation to the General Conference for consideration, which explains why there's 1,099 petitions.
Some of them read that way too.
Some of them read that way.
Like anybody could write it.
Anybody could have written it.
Yeah.
So those petitions are submitted. There's a timeline and a deadline for that to get finished. Remember, we didn't have a General Conference in 2020. This was the 2020 and the 2024 General Conference. So there was a timeline in 2019 for legislation. All that legislation remained on the books. We still had to take it up. Then they reopened it in 2023-24 for people to submit more. There was some more submitted. Then a committee gathers those petitions and they assign them to one of, and I don't remember how many 14 legislative committees. And those legislative committees run the gamut from finance and administration to, there are actually 3 called church and society that take up more social issues, one called independent commissions, they run the gamut of the United Methodist Church. And that committee actually sorts all 1,099 into one of the legislative committees. So they open General Conference, and very quickly they have to adopt the rules of debate and rules that General Conference is going to operate under, but then very quickly delegates move into legislative committee work. They gather as committees and they begin to go through the legislation assigned to their committee. Now it gets complicated. They can refer it to another committee, they can have it referred to them, but most committees then break into subcommittees, and the subcommittees divide up the work and they make a recommendation to the whole committee to adopt or not, to amend, etc. And then it goes to the full committee for some debate, and that takes 3.5 days to get that work done for those committees. And they have to, Kim's right, they have to deal with every single piece given to them. Now, sometimes, not often, but sometimes they can bundle some stuff. If there's a petition that is related to the exact same paragraph of the Book of Discipline, and there are 4 different versions of it, they can take one and say, hey, these other 3, we're going to reject those 3 as a group in favor of the one we adopted. Everything that gets adopted then goes to the plenary session of General Conference, which really, it meets every day. For the first 5 days, it only meets in the mornings, and then for the last days, it meets all day long. In the plenary, if in committee a piece of legislation got passed with fewer than 10 votes against it, it goes on what's called a consent calendar, which is a big bundle of legislation. And it's one of the very first things the plenary does every morning, and those things almost always pass, and they always pass by a lot, like 90%. And so big chunks of legislation of that 1,099 get adopted in consent calendar. If in committee there was more than 10 votes against, if there was more serious conversation, then it has to go to the floor, the plenary, as an individual piece of legislation, and has to be taken up as an individual calendar item. Now, there's more complicated, it gets more complex, because you can pull stuff from consent calendars, you can do a host of things, and on the floor, if it's a calendar item, an individual item, it can be amended on the floor, it can be referred, which generally means it's dead for this General Conference. If you refer it to an agency or a committee, it won't get taken up again for 4 years. But that's generally how things get dealt with. They're either adopted, they're rejected in committee, or rejected in the plenary, or they're referred to an agency or a committee. That kind of rounded out.
That's fair. And I would say, like in my committee experience, and Jill, you could speak in yours, we rejected more petitions than we moved on to the plenary. Some were just redundant, and like Nate said, because individuals can submit, anybody can submit. Oftentimes it's done on behalf of agencies or churches or annual conferences, but sometimes it's just one person. And it does sometimes read that way. It sometimes reads like this individual had a bone to pick about a very particular situation in their context, right?
There might be one submitted by Nate Berniking.
Nate Berniking had a bone to pick. And he filled one out, right? But sometimes you read it and you're like, does this have real global application, right? Or is this just about poor leadership in this one annual conference, and they're trying to fix it by making everybody follow in line, right? So that's the work of the legislative committee to think through that. Yeah. So did your committee pass more, or do you have a sense of, because I had one of the smallest legislative, we only had 52 pieces of legislation. Do you know how many you had?
I don't remember how many we had. I feel like it was probably half and half, because the judicial stuff, is often a little bit less like that because it's about our kind of court system and rules, and so the people writing those pieces of legislation are more lawyers.
They're lawyers. Lawyers write them.
Yeah, so their language is a little better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we rejected most of ours, so they were. But that's okay because we don't need the Book of Discipline to get any bigger, right? Like it's already big enough. So let's talk about the legislation that passed. We'll talk about the 3 R's because that's what most people are interested in. And then if you have questions about the other legislation, we would love to talk about some of the other legislation because most people are fixated on this. And those 3 R's, it was in the video. That and our bishop calls it the 3 rocks in the river. That's his version of the R. But the R's stand for worldwide regionalization. So regionalization, and we have an expert on the panel to talk about that. Revised social principles and the removal of harmful language. So that's kind of what we would consider kind of the inclusion bucket, especially around the LGBTQ concerns, right? So we're going to talk about worldwide regionalization first. It is the most complicated, but before we talk to our local expert about it, I will just remind people the worldwide regionalization is really about structure of the church, how we're organized as a body, and it's a very complicated process because it involves changing parts of our Constitution, because our Constitution is the document that set up the structure. And what was passed at General Conference is step 1 of a multi-year, complicated process to move towards regionalization. So we're nowhere near the finish line on this. But the reason I say we have an expert here is Jill, she mentions she serves on the Standing Committee for Central Conference Matters, and they were a critical body involved in the process. She's been on this committee for 8 years. She got elected for another 4 years to serve on it. It's kind of the local church committee that you never roll off of, right? But it's important that continuity continue to happen because she's been very involved in the process. And Missourians have been very involved in the process throughout the development of this particular legislation. So in a nutshell, can you take this very piece of complicated legislation and maybe describe what it's going to hopefully do if it ultimately comes into life and happens, and what impact might it mean for Missourians? Okay. That's a big question, but I have faith in you that you could do it.
Yes. Okay, so they kind of mentioned it in the video. I think what's helpful is because the Methodist Church is a United States church, we were founded here, what has been the case for a long time is that it was primarily a U.S. church with, I think he said, outposts of Methodism in other places. And probably 12 years ago, the General Conference was looking around at the actual reality of the church and saying, maybe that's not the case anymore. So actually, maybe it's a little more equitable. There are a lot of Methodists in Africa. There are a lot of Methodists in the Philippines. There are a good number of Methodists in Europe. Maybe we shouldn't be acting like it's a U.S. church with some extra people and maybe start treating everyone the same. And so that process was started 12 years ago, trying to look toward how can we make things more equitable, more fair? How can we make our systems and our structure look more like the actual reality of the church? And so that's kind of the reasoning behind why we started doing that. So basically, regionalization is what's true right now is, or not now, but was true, is that the United States had one structure and then everyone else had another structure. So it was the United States Church and then central conferences, which is the churches outside of the U.S. And there's several of them. There's several in Africa. There's one in Philippines. There's 4 or 5 in Europe, central conferences. And at the central conference meetings, they do things like elect bishops, but they also do things like they are allowed to adapt the Book of Discipline so that it makes sense in their context. So a couple examples. For one thing, pensions aren't the same in Europe or in Africa as they are here. And so that would be one way they would adapt, is they would adopt their own pension retirement kind of system. Parsonage requirements, you could probably guess, would not be the same in the United States as it is in the Philippines or someplace else. And so there's just things that they adapt for themselves. And we don't, in the United States, have that, we haven't had that ability to make adaptations because we were kind of the ones making the rules to begin with. Yeah. So with regionalization, basically what's happening is that the United States will now become a central conference. So the other central conferences will still stay the same, and we will also become a central conference. What that means is that in the past, for example, the pensions in the United States had to be voted on at general conference. So people from the Philippines and Europe and Africa had to sit through days and days of conversation about pensions that had nothing to do with them. So we wasted a lot of their time and energy, and they flew all the way over here and took time off work and all those things to vote on stuff that really didn't apply to them. And so in the central conference meeting now, those US-centric things will be moved to that meeting so that we can vote on our own pensions and not have to bother other people with them. Does that help?
Sure. But it's not there yet because it involves structure. A lot of the structure I mentioned is embedded in our Constitution. So when we passed it at General Conference, within those petitions related to getting us to a new structure, it's going to require ratification of some constitutional amendments. And similar to how the United States, if we had an amendment to our Constitution, who ratifies amendments to our Constitution in the United States? The states, right? The states. So in our system, annual conferences ratify constitutional amendments. So we're now going to have to go through a process. It's probably going to take 18 months, maybe 2 years, to run legislation through all of the annual conferences around the entire globe to ratify the constitutional amendments that are attached to this piece of legislation to put it into action. So, like I said, this is a multi-year, complicated process. We're going to get to, here in Missouri, spend an entire year educating clergy and lay members about worldwide regionalization so that when our clergy and lay members show up at annual conference in June of 2025, you're going to be ready to vote on it.
Yes, vote yes.
And the answer is yes. It's my personal goal that the Missouri Annual Conference passes it at the highest possible threshold, because ratification of constitutional amendments require a 2/3 aggregate vote of all voting United Methodists. So it's not 2/3 of annual conferences, it's everybody voting. So if Missouri passes it at 98 or 99%, that helps the whole worldwide body because it increases our chances of passing it with a 2/3 aggregate vote. So that's my goal, is to make people feel as comfortable with the legislation as possible, so next year they know what they're voting on. They feel good about it. They have a good sense of it. So that's worldwide regionalization. That's the first R. The second R is around removal of harmful language, kind of that inclusion bucket. And Nate mentioned that the idea of a consent calendar, right? There were some items related to the removal of harmful language that had so few votes in their legislative committee that they ended up on the consent calendar. Some of that ended up on the consent calendar on, I think, Wednesday of the second week, the third day. And because they were on the consent calendar and no one followed the process of getting 20 friends to sign a yellow form to take it off the consent calendar so that we would have to debate it and talk about it, it passed at the consent calendar with 93% of people affirming it. So there just was this sense that people did not feel like we needed to wrestle with it. I heard young adults say in passing, it was almost like the church said, well, duh. That was their description of it. So there were 2 items on that Wednesday that got passed, and one was removing the phrase self-avowed practicing homosexual as a chargeable offense. And the other was around the ban on same-sex weddings. Is that right? Mm-hmm, I think so. Yeah, those 2.
It's 2 against 1.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now there were other pieces of inclusion that were related to some of those pieces. Well, actually, those are the 2 that were effective immediately.
No, only ordination. Only removing it.
Okay, that was it.
Yeah, removing it as a bar to ordination, and yeah. So the discipline had a lot of restrictive language. One was a restriction on the qualifications for ordination or licensing candidacy. One was a chargeable offense. Those were amended in committee to make them effective immediately upon the close of General Conference. And so, and at least part of that, if not all of that, got adopted, as Kim said, on a consent calendar on the 3rd day, which thrust the United Methodist Church into the New York Times. That may have been the headline you saw. And it was almost anticlimactic.
Yeah.
People had to take a minute to realize they needed to celebrate those who really were seeking that. But that's how that happened.
I was listening to an NPR podcast called Today Explained. I don't know if people ever listen to that podcast. It's associated with NPR. And the reporter who was at General Conference reporting on kind of what was happening says in this podcast episode, this story of, I didn't realize what was happening until I saw the AP writer run out of the room to go get on the phone. And I knew something had happened, right? So it was kind of confusing to people to know that something had happened. But I will say that the delegates knew what was happening, right? We knew that it was voting because, part of our job, like you sent us there, was to read all of this work and to be prepared every day to know what was on the consent calendar. And there were people pulling stuff off consent calendars all week long, but they didn't. Because I think the church was of one mind that this was the time and this is what we needed to do.
How's that going to work with the nations in Africa where it's a death sentence to be, LGBT? And is that part of the solution? Was the regionalization was to allow for that?
So the question, in case you didn't hear that, is how are kind of removing some of these pieces around inclusion, how is that going to work for our friends that live in countries where it is illegal to identify differently than kind of the rest of the community or whatever their norms are around sexual orientation? I think that's a good question. Anybody want to take that up? Because
you're the member of the standing committee.
Well, I would say 2 things. One thing is that, as I said earlier, they're allowed to adapt the Book of Discipline, so they could adapt those rules if they wanted to. I think also it was removal of language, so it wasn't in the positive, like you have to do a wedding or you have to allow people to become clergy. It was just removing the restriction. And so they could choose not to do any of those things. And so I think they felt like if this is what we needed, then they were happy to, yeah.
And when we talk about revised social principles, we'll bring this back up again because I think you'll see how we made a compromise in order to help people outside of our country. But Jill's right. For a lot of people, the removal of this had no impact on their United Methodist ministry in their context. This was really a U.S. concern because we were the ones that were struggling against it. And we would hear from people, like we have great relationships with the Mozambican delegation. We had opportunities over the course of the past 5 years to talk to them about where we were, what we were struggling with, and they will tell you it's not like they were like this progressive oddball group from Mozambique. They were fairly conservative folks that understood Scripture differently, but they would say, I can see why you would need the freedom to do this, to be in ministry with your community, right? That didn't necessarily mean that they were going to change their own understanding or think about it, but they understood that we needed permission to. And so when you look at the percentage of votes, and even the ones that didn't end up on the consent calendar, those that were, calendar items where we passed, there were a bunch of Africans voting for it. There's just no way that there wasn't. So this, sometimes we say in the United States, oh, the Africans, right? Like they're this monolithic group that all thinks alike, and that is so not true, right? If you've ever had the opportunity to travel on the continent of Africa, multiple countries, right? Like lots of different contexts. It ranges from South Africa to Liberia to North Katanga Annual Conference in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and it's just vast in their understandings. And there are people that are on the spectrum of theology in the same way there are here in the United States. So we need to be cautious of saying the Filipinos or the Africans, they all think this way, because you can't not look at the votes and realize that non-U.S. citizens were voting for these motions. And so you might ask, well, why? Why? And I think that some of the conversations we've been having over the 5 years, we heard a lot of, because disaffiliation is not something that happens in other parts of the world. And, we had people come up to us and say, I'm so sorry. We were sitting behind us where it was Alabama, and they have had a ridiculous number of disaffiliations. And heard Central Conference delegates come up to them and say, I'm so sorry, and hug them and mourn with them. And, people realizing how painful it has been over the course of the past 5 years since 2019. And I think that our siblings around the world realized we needed to truly live into this idea of being fully inclusive, and saying that we're not gonna restrict anybody based on an aspect of their identity anymore. And people who may read Scripture differently than some of us thought, I can get behind that. I can understand that. So from the removal, the things that were removed were the obstacles that were preventing LGBTQ people from pursuing licensed and ordained ministry as an out person. Now, we have been licensing and ordaining gay people since the beginning of time. And if you don't think that, then you're naive. But they have been closeted. They have been hiding their identity from us because it has been dangerous to be who they truly are, okay? So we've removed that restriction. So now it is up to district committees on ministry and the boards of ordained ministry to properly vet gifted and called people into ministry. So that restriction has been removed. And the other restriction that has been removed is around whether our churches and our pastors can participate in same-sex weddings. Now, our pastors can participate and have been able to participate in weddings. They just can't preside, right? They weren't supposed to. They got in big trouble. And in 2019, we really tightened the screws to what would happen if you got caught doing one. And we took out all of those penalties and now said it's up to pastors to decide who they want to marry. And it's up to churches to decide who they host for their weddings. And so that was also removed. One of the things that happened is as part of a compromise and to indicate to people that we truly believe the United Methodist Church is a Big Ten. There were some pieces of legislation that said, churches, through your board of trustees, you can say we're not comfortable hosting weddings. Nobody's making you host weddings. So it did remind us that trustees have the ability to say we're not comfortable doing this. So it allowed that. It also explicitly said pastors shall not be forced to preside at weddings. So now that language is specifically there. It didn't need to be there because that goes without saying. Nate and I are pastors here. Pastor Nancy's back there. Pastor Lee. We have all been, and Curtis, we've all been authorized to say no to weddings. And we probably all could give you a case where we've said no to a wedding.
If they pay my honorarium, I'll marry them.
What's your honorarium?
$350.
Wow, he's cheap. I always say my honorarium is half of what you're paying your photographer. And they freak out, so. That's not true, but I think it's funny to see their faces when I say that. They spend too much on photography. So that was kind of removal of harmful language. And now let's talk about revised social principles. So the revised social principles are in this little document. Again, this was a multi-year process. We were supposed to vote on this in 2020. It has been a global exercise. Missourians have been involved in this one. We helped proofread it. We sent it out to various groups of laity and clergy to read through it over the course of the past 8 years as we prepared for this. Revised social principles, it's important to note, what are social principles? Social principles are not church law. They are our best theological thinking on a variety of topics. There's also another set of things we take up called social resolutions, made up they show up in the Book of Resolutions right here, right? Book of resolutions are about very action-oriented stuff. Principles are kind of like, hey, this is our best thinking about this particular topic, and then resolutions may be about some of those principles, but it also gives you some ideas about here's what to do about it, right? Like if you have concerns about gun violence in schools, a resolution is going to give you some action items. But principles are fairly short, little kind of pithy paragraphs about what we think about. And it ranges from everything from, of course, human sexuality and marriage. That's in here. But it's also about food justice and protecting space and science, like what we think about science and poverty and graft and bribery and corruption and human trafficking and slavery and gambling and alcohol usage and bullying and media and communication technology. It's a variety of things. I think it's worth people reading. It wouldn't take very long. It's kind of a short PDF. And this, if you Google this is what's going to come up. It was passed wholesale except for one amendment. And that amendment was around the marriage paragraph. So if you Google this tonight and come up with this, it will not have the amendment in it. It hasn't been updated. This is the version that came to us on the floor. So let's talk about the amendment around marriage. So marriage in the new revised social principles was going to change our theological statement to say that marriage was a sacred covenant between two, that within the church, we affirm marriage as a sacred lifelong covenant that brings two people of faith into union with one another and into deeper relationship with God and religious community. Okay? So that's a change from what it was, before, which is about, it says a man and a woman. Right? And so it changed it to two people instead of a man and woman. Now, it also said two people of faith, which I had some clergy colleagues who were concerned because they're married to non-believers. And they were like, well, what does that mean for my marriage? I'm married to a person who's not of faith, right? But, most people were like, this is a social principle. It's not a rule. It's not a church law. I don't have to divorce my spouse because they don't go to church anymore, right? So that's not what this was about. But on the floor of General Conference, when we took up that particular social principle, a delegate rose to speak to it and offered an amendment. and she was from Zimbabwe. She ultimately has ended up on our judicial council, so she got elected to judicial council. But she said that I'd like to propose an amendment to this particular sentence. And she said, what I would like to do is offer, and these are her words, a double-barrel definition of marriage. And we were like, okay, say more. Like, what does that mean? And she said, I propose the following amendment, that this sentence now read, within the church, we affirm marriage as a sacred lifelong covenant that brings two people of faith, and then in parentheses, adult man and woman of consenting age, or two adult persons of consenting age into union with one another. And she said, I get why you need to change this. I get that this will help you by saying it's between two persons. And we all know that two persons could be a man and woman, right? But I'm going to have a hard time going back to Zimbabwe if I can't point to a place where it says marriage is between a man and a woman. But I think if we add this parenthetical reference, that will do it. And the body said, you know, she's got a point. And we passed it. So this document, that was the only change to it. So 8 years of work, 8 years of global conversation, of which they talked about this, about two people, but one delegate coming up, and through holy conferencing, we said, you know, we can do this. Because it actually expands it and allows more people to lean into it. And that's what we're about. So that is part of the revised social principles that got passed. Now, part of the reason for revised social principles was to create something that worked globally, because a lot of our social principles were very U.S.-centric. So that's why some of these, they got shorter. There are some aspects that are more global in nature, stuff around, human trafficking is a problem here, but there are things like, there's a statement on polygamy that we might say, well, that's not as much of a U.S. issue as we might think about. And it's really was brought forward related to the harm that had been done by U.S. missionaries going into Africa and telling communities that if you were married to more than one woman and had additional families, that you needed to shun those families, thereby making them homeless and without any kind of support by the church. The church was formally shunning people. So now there's a statement of polygamy that doesn't say, hey, it's okay to have, that's not what it says, and I encourage you to read it, but it's about offering compassion to people that come to our churches who may have families that look different than one marriage, and offering compassion to second families instead of, it really is trying to end the practice of shunning families, right? That shouldn't happen at the church's level. Okay, so I think that most people don't know what our social principles are, have never read it. These will go into effect January 1st. And again, not church law, some guidelines. And I've told other people this, I told my confirmation class this, if you find yourself in a church where you agree with everything the church says, you've entered a cult, right? You're supposed to disagree with some things in your church. There are things in this that I'm kind of like, gosh, I wish they would have used stronger language. Or I don't know that I agree with that. That's being a good Methodist, right? That means you're using your head and your heart and saying, I've got to figure this out for myself. That we all don't have to think alike, but this is a good document for which to wrestle with our salvation together. This is a good document to have a Sunday school class on, or a small group, and really talk about, well, what do you think about maternal health, and what does that mean for us, and how we should be in a church, and then go to the resolutions and find out are there any resolutions that are tied to some of those principles so that we can get involved in it. I think it's good fodder for theological thinking about contemporary issues that we're all facing. So those were the 3 R's. So what are your questions? And we'll try our best to answer those.
Apparently I'm supposed to bring this around. I'll let you talk into it. So
Who's that?
He's our Phil Donahue tonight.
I don't need a microphone. I can yell.
Well, I think it's for the online people.
Oh, okay. The word contextual, that's to get what's in print to agree with what the principles are, right? The word, I'm trying to figure out the word, what's the first, right off the bat. To be more contextual, a church to be contextual in ministry while remaining connected with the mission around the world. The word contextual, explain, make sure I got it clear in my head what you're meaning by that.
Yeah, so contextual, especially as it relates to regionalization. Do you want to talk? Sure.
Yeah, contextual just means in your context. So kind of like we said before, like parsonages in Africa are going to look different than parsonages in the US. And so in their context, they're going to need a different rule or a different, is that the question you're asking? Okay.
I can give a very hard and specific. Parsonages is a really good one. In the book of discipline, and church buildings too, in the book of discipline, technically speaking, we're supposed to be working towards compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Americans with Disabilities Act. If you have ever been to Mozambique or any country, even in Western Europe, that does not make sense in that context.
Why do they have to follow the American Disabilities Act? They don't live in America. You know, they may have their own act of some sort, right? To follow. Yeah, in Europe they do. Yeah, the EU. So. I fully expected him to have questions.
I haven't heard a word about UMCOR. To me, UMCOR is very important because when the tidal wave hit Thailand and the news got there, UMCOR was already there because they had an outfit out of India that got there in 24 hours. Yeah. So UMCOR to me is very important.
Yeah. So UMCOR is United Methodist Committee on Relief, right? Like that's our disaster response arm, and they do work around the world related to natural disasters. It's one of the things I'm most proud of being a United Methodist. It's one of the ways in which we live out our connectionalism. You're giving Missouri, because we experience natural disasters on a regular basis. I think we're compassionate when we see it happening to other people. And so y'all have been so generous to give deeply to UMCOR. And so one of the things that happened, there wasn't anything that was specific to UMCOR that I saw except for the budget. Nate, you want to talk about the budget?
Yes. First of all, let me say I don't anticipate any significant changes to UMCOR over the next 4 years. I think the United Methodist Committee on Relief, the General Board of Global Ministries, that they know, they have a plan, they know what they're going to do. However, you heard in the video, we adopted the lowest budget, quadrennial budget in the history of the General Conference. Now, let's be clear about that. It's in the history of the General Conference of the United Methodist Church, which started in 1968, not the history of the Methodist movement. They had smaller budgets, a lot smaller. The budget was cut significantly in the face of several things, disaffiliations being first and foremost among them. I think you all have seen the numbers. Several thousand United Methodist churches chose to disaffiliate. Here in Missouri, we had just over 120 of about 700 churches, a little more than 700 churches that chose to disaffiliate. And it became very clear that what the United Methodist Church was supporting in one time could not happen over the next 4 years. I won't bore you with the details, but in essence, we cut about 40% from the budget that had been the quadrennial. It was supposed to be 2016 to 2020. It was really 2016 to 2024. So for 25 now, starting in 2025 and going till the next General Conference in 2028, we've pulled out about 40% of the budget. There was a compromise made on the floor where it could go up in 2 years if the collection rate for all the annual conferences exceeds 90%. The question is, well, have we ever done that? Yes. We used to do it all the time. The last time we hit 90% was in 2018. We know what happened in 2020, the pandemic, which also was another reason that people felt there was a need to reduce the budget. All the agencies have been facing reductions in staff. They have largely accomplished that already, but they have been planning for this for a while. They have known that this cut was coming. All the agencies have made accommodations. While they've certainly had to reduce ministries and personnel, they are all still in existence and they are all still functioning at similar ministry levels as they have. Is that fair?
Yeah. So my question, and maybe the question in your minds are, if we cut the general conference budget at 40-odd%, does that mean our local church apportionment bill is going to be cut 40-odd%?
No. Because in the face of the pandemic and in the face of disaffiliations, we as the Missouri Annual Conference adopted conference budgets that significantly reduced what the general church was actually apportioning. Here's how that happened. Remember I told you it was supposed to be a budget from 16 to 20? Well, in 2019, getting ready for the 2020 General Conference, we received a set of apportionment dollars reflecting it was less than 40%, but a 30+% reduction. We put those into our budget. We got the workbook ready for annual conference, and then COVID. And we did not have General Conference to adopt that budget. So they sent us new numbers that put it back up to where it was before. And Missouri and probably 25 other annual conferences said, thanks, but we like the first set of numbers we got. And we used those. So we were under apportioning. This will be the first time at annual conference session in June, here in just a couple of weeks, that we'll actually be apportioning what the general church has sent us. And actually, with a 40% reduction in the general church budget, we still will see some savings. We still have a reduction of about $270,000 for our total budget. So we're still reducing annual conference apportionments, but not at 40%. Not this time.
And don't forget the $270,000, right, gets spread out across all the churches. So it's not like, yeah, you'll feel it, but it'll be small. No. Other questions?
Just a question on what Pastor Jenny said at the beginning. You said, I was curious, that comment, the church is growing, but we're talking about disaffiliation. I mean, I realize some churches may actually be growing, but I was curious why you said that.
Well, the church is growing, just maybe not in the United States.
So net overall, globally?
Yeah. Yeah, it's growing dramatically in Africa and the Philippines. And so since we are a worldwide denomination, our church is growing because we are them, right? And they are us. And so the church is growing net overall. It's just we're not necessarily seeing it in our annual conference or as a country because of dynamics that are happening. But I will tell you, last night we were all at the Missouri Annual Conference Awards Night, where we give out awards annually to different churches and individuals, and there are stories of growth and just amazing ministry that's happening. I know it's happening here in this church and in different ways. So there is growth happening. It may not always translate to, what we, poetically call butts and seats, but there is growth happening, and it just looks a little differently. And I think that's one of the things that Bishop Farr has been pretty adamant as we've, sadly disaffiliated or approved the disaffiliation of 125 churches or whatever it was, that we are going to be smaller, but he believes we're going to be stronger. And I definitely have felt that, and have felt that over the course of the past year, of us being kind of more united and committed to our future moving forward. Definitely felt it at General Conference. The people that were in the room, except for maybe 50 people, wanted to be there, and they were proud to be United Methodist, and were doubling down on saying, we're not going anywhere. Like, we are committed to this church. We love our church, and we're excited about the future. We are a people of the future, and I saw that. I see that in Missouri all the time. So yes, we're growing. It just sometimes it hurts personally when we see it in our own context, and we don't necessarily see it translating. But all over the world, the United Methodist Witness is growing.
Is disaffiliation primarily a U.S. issue?
Only a U.S. issue. Yeah.
In talking about the number of churches that we've lost, you talked about disaffiliation. How many churches have we had to close because of people no longer being in that area? I mean, especially in rural.
Churches, right? Yeah, a lot. Not as many as we disaffiliated. Sometimes that gets confused. But I want to say in the last 2 years, we have closed about 32 churches. If you take the ones we'll be closing at this annual conference session, it's in excess of 30 churches. And most of those were down to fewer than 10 folks and simply could not keep going. We averaged between 15 and 17 church closures, and have been for a while now.
Years. Yeah. And that's part of the natural life cycle of a church, right? Like, that's part of it. So remember, all of Paul's churches are closed too.
Although the Greek Orthodox Church.
Yeah, the Greek Orthodox Church would disagree.
They are still there.
How many new starts have we heard?
So we currently have 12 new church starts happening in the Missouri Annual Conference, and our Congregational Development Team has a plan for the next 4 years to start 3 new churches every year for the next 4 years. So we hope to have 12 more by the end of the quad. And I will tell you that this is one of the exciting things about what's happening in Missouri, because there were pockets of our state that disaffiliated a number of churches in one area. Right, and so one of our examples happened down in the kind of the southeast section of our state, and there were a number of churches where there really was almost like a Methodist desert because of the disaffiliations. And United Methodists, who were committed to being United Methodists and staying United Methodists, started contacting each other and gathering together. Started meeting. Would occasionally say, "Is it okay if we meet?" And we're like, "Yeah, keep meeting. What are you talking about? You don't need our permission to meet." And eventually I called their bishop, called the DS, and asked the bishop, like, "Will you send us a pastor?" Like, this was a lay started, like, old-fashioned Methodists starting their own church, right? Like, which is who we are. We are a lay-driven Methodist movement, and the folks in Bernie now have a new church called New Day, and it was all lay started.
It has more people in it than the Bernie church that disaffiliated, more than twice as many people.
So growth is happening, right? It just looks different.
Can't believe you people have run out of questions.
I will ask, for you, just in your own church context, are there things you're worried about? Are there things that you're hearing people in your own church? Are there things you're concerned about related to anything that you heard at General Conference that we could be helpful to you?
Well, I don't know about helpful. We've known families that are longtime members, and they've disappeared, or we've heard where they've gone, but I don't know all the reasons why they left. Because, like you just gave example of churches, they come and go, for different reasons. So whether, now that this is, I assume that some of it is because the church was in flux and waiting and talking about these issues for years, that people were tired of hearing about it, not knowing what was going to happen, wanted to leave. But I don't know. So maybe now that there's some decisions in changes one way or another, that'll maybe settle down. So I don't know if the next 4 years will show that. Yeah.
We'll see. No, I think that that's a good point. And that's the thing that since we've been back from General Conference, at least Nate and I and the other conference staff have been working through, is talking to our pastors around the state who are mourning people calling up and saying, I'm done, right? So while we don't have a disaffiliation option any longer, because the option that existed had a sunset clause to it, and the General Conference chose not to enact another option in the same vein, what we anticipate is that individuals will leave, right? And that's what you're all experiencing, is people saying, I'm uncomfortable, I don't like this, I don't like this direction, or basically, saying like, I'm not comfortable with people thinking differently than I do on this particular subject, right? And so that's what I think we're seeing as individuals leave related to that. I think some did get weary. Some people got tired of the debate and talking about it. But I will also remind us that had General Conference not done some of its actions, different groups of people would be leaving, right? We were going to lose individuals no matter what General Conference did, because there have been people who've been waiting since 1972 for this church to really be what it claims to be, which is a church for all people. So, and we're always going to lose individuals, people who think you are supposed to believe everything. But I like to remind people that as United Methodists, your commitment and membership is to practices, not beliefs, right? You commit to your prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness, not to an ascribed set of beliefs about marriage or human sexuality. It's about we're agreeing to try to live out our salvation together as a people. I personally think, and this is why I'm a United Methodist, that I am a better Christian because you're a different Christian than me, and we're in relationship together. And that I somehow learn about my faith and something about God because somebody with a different perspective, teaches me something about a God that is greater and broader than I can ever possibly imagine. So I hear grief in our churches around the loss of individuals, of people that have left. The most painful being people ghosting their communities. They just disappear, right? And you never hear. And I think that they think that maybe is less painful. But I would say if you know friends who have done that, maybe have them just send their pastor a note and let their pastor know, like, we just needed a change. We know we needed to go somewhere else in order to live out our faith. But the ghosting thing, I think that's actually more painful than having a conversation saying this isn't the right fit for us. We want everybody to get connected to another faith community. It's part of the elder's job and the deacon's job and licensed local pastor's job, is to make sure people are connected to faith communities. So we want to see that happen. Yes. So one of the pieces of legislation was around reaffiliation. So what does that mean? Because that's not a word we've had. And the idea behind this petition was, what if some of these churches who have disaffiliated get down the road a while and say, I think we'd like to come back home? So if you've read anything in Methodist history, we have, this is a tradition that we embrace, one of splitting and reunifying. Splitting and reunifying. And so this was a version of, like, let's just name it, that there might be some churches who say, we made what we thought was the right decision for us at that time, but now we'd like to reaffiliate. And so the petition was around how much we should legislate around that and how much the general church should tell an annual conference, you got to include these kinds of things, or this is how you got to do it. And basically it just encouraged the conference board of trustees to develop a process for how that might happen. Do you want to say anything?
We will develop that process in the fall. At first, I get this question a lot in relation to that petition. Have any of the churches that disaffiliated called and wanted to come back? The answer is sort of. We had one. However, that's because 3 weeks after the disaffiliation, they got mad at their pastor, fired their pastor, who took half of the congregation with him when he was fired, and they really they didn't know how they were going to go on. We couldn't really engage in that at the time, and it was a bit early. Otherwise, no other church has called looking to reaffiliate. But Kim is right. I mean, this is a Methodist thing. We have come apart and gone back together a lot within the United Methodist Church over a couple centuries. And so the trustees will be looking at that, deciding what needs to happen for a local church if they were to call us up and say, hey, we have buyer's remorse, we'd like to come back.
Well, I'd just like to thank you for coming and sharing information. We went home this week to Northeast Missouri, and I was just wondering, there's lots of misinformation going on, and what is the plan for sharing what you did tonight very nicely?
Thank you for that question. And you're right, we live in an age of misinformation on a lot of different subjects. So our plan as the Missouri Conference is to really encourage people to be a part of our opening plenary for annual conference, where the bishop is going to take up this topic and spend 90 minutes just kind of unpacking what happened and what does it mean for Missouri churches. So that'll be on the Friday of annual conference, June 7th at 10 a.m. That will be live streamed and recorded. And so then we'll send out that piece to all of our churches so they can have it. However, there are people among us that are encouraging this misinformation and fanning the flames. There was a press release this week from our Council of Bishops about our relationship to the global Methodist Church and what that means. And basically, I encourage you to read the press release related to that, but the Council of Bishops said we do not recognize the GMC as a denomination. And if that is to change, we would encourage them to stop providing misinformation to people and to stop actively recruiting our people to their churches. If they want to start a new church, they need to be going out into the world and sharing the good news with people who don't yet know Christ, just like we're supposed to be doing that, right? We're not supposed to go steal the Presbyterians, right? We need Presbyterians to be good Presbyterians, but there are plenty of people out there who don't have a relationship with Jesus. That is our job, and we want to encourage the GMC to do the same. Stop trying to pick our people off. And so that's basically the gist of the press release. Misinformation, it's hard, and like when some people kind of decide that that's what they want to believe, it's hard to get them off it. There is a lot of mistrust. And so one of the things we're trying to do as a conference, as districts, your DSs in different areas, we're trying to really just lean into the conversation and at least let us have the conversation. Let us get to a place where we can try to build trust. But people are suspicious of institutions, and we have made mistakes. Right? We have failed churches. I grew up in a 2-point charge in Southern Illinois, and I tell you, sometimes those appointments were just bad appointments, right? And over time, that breaks down trust in an institution. Now, I don't think anybody was intentionally trying to give us bad appointments, right? It was just a bad missional fit. But trust is something that we actively have to work on. But it's got to be, the only way to build trust in my experience of relationships is two people actually have to be in conversation with each other. And that's been the hard thing. So pray about it.
I'd actually ask if and for that you can come and see me after, because Kim and I have talked a little bit. I have a real heart for rural Missouri, especially north of Interstate 70. I live north of Interstate 70. If there are churches that you think would make sense to do one of these, I'll go do it by myself. And Joe will come with me, apparently. So I'm more than willing to go to those churches to talk. I just maybe need help identifying.
You know you have connections with home churches, right? Like my home church in Southern Illinois is like, can you come over here and talk? You know, like if we can be of service in that way, we want to. We really do. So, but we need them to ask us to come, right? We don't want to impose it upon them.
So one of the ways to fix things is to correct wrongs. So how much was it, did it take center stage? This approval of apology for the role Methodists played in the overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii in 1893. That was a long time ago, but I believe we are who we were, who we're going to be. And so, you know, I believe that connecting those wrongs is real important. For instance, there was a Methodist minister led a massacre of Indians at Sand Creek. My brother's been there. I've been there. It's you know, it'd be nice to apologize for that. Already? That's already been done? Okay. Yeah.
We're still continuing to apologize for the Sand Creek massacre, but in 2016 we did a formal apology for that, and
I didn't know about that.
We published a book about the Methodist role in that massacre. So if you haven't seen that book, you need to see it. It's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, the reason people, I've had family members ask, why are we apologizing for Hawaii? like what about Methodist missionaries were actively involved in the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy. And so we're just claiming, right, our role in that and acknowledging that so that we can begin the hard work of reconciliation around it. So that will be, this is the beginning. This will be a multiple year process. Probably another study will be done about it. A book will, that part of the book's proceeds from the Sand Creek massacre go to the native groups, right? So like we don't benefit or profit off of that. And so I would imagine there's going to be something similar with the people of Hawaii. Yeah. We also had another apology when we talk about inclusion. It's also things like this about repairing harm done. Another apology we made was around victims and survivors of sexual abuse by the hands of the church. So clergy sexual misconduct, abuse that happened at some of our scouting troops and this is like for all of time, right? So a formal apology was read from the floor of General Conference. We all participated in it as a body, and now every annual conference will issue an apology. So in June in St. Charles, the Missouri Annual Conference will make a formal apology for victims and survivors of sexual misconduct and abuse by the hands of the church. And so that's something we will participate in and begin to do the work of repair. And so, like, what does that mean? What does reconciliation look like? How are we providing resources to victims and survivors of sexual trauma and abuse at the hands of the church? So that's, when we think of inclusion, a lot of people think just about the LGBTQ issue, and that's been a long road. But there's all this other inclusion work that we do that sometimes doesn't make the New York Times headline, right? Well, we'll stick around a little bit. You've been a great audience. I think we've spent enough of your evening. And so I will just say, go out into the world and be that salt and light that is so needed in our world, and be proudly and unapologetically United Methodists, because I think that we really have something to offer a really hurting and weary world. So go be proud about it. Don't apologize for who you are. Thanks for coming.